Okay, the portrait of Moshe Rabenu, the painting of Moshe Rabenu, wreaks havoc between the Litvaks and the Chassidim. What are we talking about? So we have 3 papers over here, fascinating information, and let's get right into it. Rabbi Yisroel Lifshitz was a big Rav in Germany, passes away around 1860, so Tzemach Tzedek times. He himself was a student of Rabbi Akiva Eger, okay? And he wrote a very important commentary on Mishnayos. The Rebbe commented that it's hard to learn a Mishnah without the commentary of the Tiferes Yisroel. Rabbi Yisroel Lifshitz wrote the Tiferes Yisroel on Mishnayos. However, there are a number of things that he wrote that made him a little unpopular amongst the Chassidim, ultra-Orthodox Jews. One of them was about evolution. He wrote something, some say it wasn't him, it was his son, but there's something attributed to him where he writes that the world might be much older than we say it is. And he bases it on Midrashim, that the Eibishter created worlds and then destroyed them, which means the Eibishter tried a few times with planet Earth until everything was right. And maybe some of the old fossils were from some of the early tries that God did, which could have been millions of years before. So he has a whole theory about this, and it was not very popular by the Chassidim. But there was something else that he wrote, which made him actually, which was a big issue in the eyes of the Litvische world more than the Chassidische world. What do I refer to? I refer to number 1. It's a Tiferes Yisroel's comment in the end of Masechta Kiddushin. The Mishnah there says, Toiv sheberoifim legehenim. The best doctors go to Gehenim. And the worst lawyers go to Gan Eden. Right? That's what But the best doctors go to Gehenim. And he wants to explain what that means. And he says, number 1, V'hu al pi mashem atzasi kosav. I found written Dover Nechma, something delightful. He doesn't say where he found it, which is curious and suspicious. But what did he find? When Moshe Rabbeinu took us out of Egypt, the nations heard and they shook in dread. And they were puzzled on this Moshe. Through him, so many gvuras and niflois, so many miracles and wonders. An Arabic king. He sent a professional painter to paint Moshe Rabbeinu and to bring it to him. Because this king had a group of chachamim, physiognomists, that would study the painting and reveal to the king all of the traits, character of this incredible leader, Moshe Rabbeinu. The Tzayer went, and he brings it to the king. So then the king calls, V'yavi v'yasav yachtav, he brings all the chachmei charoshim, all of his wise men, asher loi, and he asks them to judge based on the parts of Panav Shel Moshe. What do you see on the face? Kfi hamitzvah, based on the painting in front of you. To know tchunas tivoi, to know his character, what's his strength. And the chachomim answered to the king, and they said, Im nishpet al pitzir cluster Panav Shel Zesh. If we're going to judge based on what we see, who's mefursum legadol, who's famous, Moshe was famous, a miracle worker. If we judge based on what we see in the painting, we're going to say to our master, he's ra malolim, he has bad actions, he has gaiva, he desires money, besrius halev, he runs his own show, selfishness. And every chsaron in the world that sheigana, that you can belittle a chosh of a person, any negative trait, this man has it. And the Melech became angry, said, Mazeh, hachi yisrael, you're making fun of me? We've always heard from the entire world the opposite about Moshe Rabbeinu. And the king was angry, and everyone in the court was trembling out of fear. And they responded to the king, b'shafal kol hatchina, with they were extremely frightened from the king's rage. And they ever so softly said, each one said that they did nothing wrong. The painter and the chachomim. Each one said the other guy did a faulty job. The painter said, this portrait, splitting image. The Chachamim misdiagnosed, they misread the face, the lines and everything. It's all about the physiognomy is where everything is situated on your face, the forehead, the lines, the creases, everything about your face and about your head. And the Chachamim, they rolled the Chsoron on the painter. They said the painter obviously didn't do a good job painting Moshe. And the Melech Nichsef L'das, he wondered who was right, Taka. So he went himself, Berichba Farashavi with a whole entourage, and he came to Machne Yisrael, and he has with him the painting. He comes and he sees Moshe Ishalakim from the distance. He quickly takes out the painting. He looks at the painting. He looks at Moshe. The painting was a splitting image. The painting was a splitting image. Which means that the physiognomist must have misread Moshe Rabbeinu's face patterns. Features, thank you. His heart was faint and he was perplexed. He himself came to Moshe. He bowed down to Moshe, in front of him. He told Moshe the whole story. He said, please, my holy man, before I saw your face, I was sure that the painter is an individual, right? My group of physiognomists are a group of people. They probably know their stuff. The painter must have erred. Because my Chachamim are famous for physiognomy, ein dugmasim. But now I see that my painter did a great job. So I have to say, Chacham I bogdu bi. My Chachamim don't really know their work. And they're false Chachamim. But I take care of them. Oichle shulchani, I support them, and they've been fooling me for who knows how long. So Moshe, the man of God, said, no. The painter is a professional. Your Chachamim are professionals. They got it right. Everything they said is true. You should know, if what you heard about me wasn't true, meaning if I was a goody two-shoes from the day I was born, I wouldn't be better than a piece of wood. A piece of wood also doesn't have any negative, right? A piece of wood has no negative character traits. You ever sat on the chair and the chair screamed, get off of me? Or the chair buckles? It's happened to me many times that chairs have buckled. But that's not the chair's fault. That's my fault. But ve'im kain, therefore I'll be precious in the eyes of God. If I was born like an angel, live like an angel, what's the kunz? You should know, my friend, I'm not embarrassed to say, all the chesroinis that your Chachamim said, kulam kshur, we're 4 lines from the bottom of number 1. Kulam kshurim bi b'teva. Naturally, those are my inclinations. Those traits are really part of my soul. And it could be it's even worse than they said. However, with self-discipline and will and strength, I conquered myself. His chazakti v'rodisi, I conquered those character traits until I transformed myself. I gained a second nature. The opposite. So instead of gaiva, and instead of anger and jealousy and chemda and coveting, Moshe Rabbeinu trained himself the opposite direction to acquire the opposite. And that's why God holds me special, because of all the work and what I accomplished. That's the story. And he wants to tie it there to the doctor to say that, you know which doctor goes to Gehenna? Not the dentist, obviously. The smug doctor who has those natural and negative midas and would never ask for a second opinion, always goes with their gut feeling, even though people's lives are at stake and mistakes are made. The good doctor is one who has humility, that's always to get a second opinion and to bounce ideas off other people, etc. Fine. This is what the Tiferes Yisroel is writing almost 200 years ago. And it's an inspiring story. It's an inspiring story, but on the other hand, really, Moshe Rabbeinu was born with a horrible nature. Horrible nature. Is that true? Is it true? And if it's not true, is it belittling Moshe Rabbeinu's kavod? So we're going to discuss in Mitzvah Shem as much as information I was able to get on this. Like I mentioned a number of years ago, we discussed this. And a lot of people talk about it. With David's help, we were able to get some interesting things for your consumption. We'll begin with number 2. Number 2 was a rabbi in the 1890s. Reb Chaim Yitzchak Aaron Rappaport. He was a Rav in Vilkamir. And he wrote a work, not a very long work, it's printed about 20 pages, a little kuntras, completely debunking this entire story of the Tiferes Yisroel. And partly he's debunking the story, how the story couldn't have happened with the painter and everything. The main thing he's debunking is the very notion that Moshe Rabenu could have been born with midos rois, with bad character, right? Even if the story itself, whether it happened or not, but what about the actual idea that the greatest Navi who ever lived was born with a really bad nature which he had to conquer? And this Rabbi Rappaport minces no words, page after page, demolishing this entire story, the entire notion behind it. And in number 2 is what's written on the front page of his work. It's called Klil Tiferes. Klil Tiferes. Based on what it says in Shabbos davening, Shabbos Shachris, that Moshe Rabenu had a crown of glory, Klil Tiferes. So he wants to bring back the glory of Moshe Rabenu. He says, Omnom zeh mikodav kechamishim shana. Rabbi Rappaport in the 1890s says, 50 years ago, Nimtza le'echad migdoli hader, there was a great man. He's the Baal Tiferes Yisroel. I'm telling you who he is. Shehetik, he brings in his chibur, in his work in the end of Seder Noshim, Michtav echad, a letter that he found. V'lo noid the klal mikasa, we don't know who wrote it, right? It found a letter, came from heaven. V'shon, and over there, Hayid, he testifies about Moshe. Shehoye mitivay ram alolim, he had a bad nature, with gaiva, hoarding, and coveted money, etc. And b'chol chesroin shabaylim. V'hinei, behold, hakosav hanizker, the Tiferes Yisroel, also bozeh shtei rois gedolus, 2 major crimes. Ha'echad, the first is that what he's just saying is not true. Shehayid heipach edus haTorah shebeksav balpeh. He says, I'll prove to you from the written Torah and from the oral Torah that this can't be. So it's just false. V'ashenis, what's even worse is he's belittling Holy Moses. Shebiza v'chidef es k'toish Hashem. This doesn't do anything to promote the honor of Moshe and Kodesh Yisrael. Moshe was a perfect person. You're making him as if he was the worst kid on the block. Therefore, he says the Ga'onim agreed that the Michtav HaNizker netek me'eze chronic. The letter that Tiferes Yisroel found was copied from some type of chronic, which is German for chronicle. So some type of Goyish book. Now chronicles are usually, right, usually non-fiction. But I don't know. It sounds like they're claiming that it was actual fiction. But ulakachen, therefore, loy gilalonu mi kasvay, because the Tiferes Yisroel knew where he got it from. Some Goyish book, folk stories, some Goyish folk stories. There's no shortage of Goyish, or no shortage of folk stories in the world. And that's why the Tiferes Yisroel doesn't want to tell us where he got it, because he knew where it was from. But he said, Baruch Hashem, we found out. And so he says the 2 issues. Number 1 is Pashut not true. And secondly, it's Pashut belittling Moshe. Okay. Now these are great claims. How do you know it's not true? And also, is it in fact belittling Moshe? So let's move. Number 3 is a Gemara in Saita, a well-known Gemara, this week's parsha. Vateda oisai ki toivu. When Moshe was born, Yocheved gazes at him, and he is good. Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, Rab Meir Omer. What does it mean he was good? Toiv Shmoi. His name was Toiv, it's Pashut his name. Rabbi Yehuda says Tuvia Shmoi, his name was Tuvia. That sounds like what's that debate about? I'll tell you soon. Rab Nechemya Omer, Hagun Lenevius, he was fitting for prophecy. Now that is crucial, because the Gemara says in the Dorim, for somebody to be a Navi, they must possess certain character traits. They have to be wise, a gibber, wealthy, onav, humble. They have to be an onav. And in fact, the Gemara says we learned from Moshe, because it says in Parshas Ba'aloischa, Moshe was an onav moed, so humble. But when he was born, if the Tiferes Yisroel is right, when he was born, he had gaiva. So he's not Hagun Lenevius. How could he be fitting for prophecy? Right? That's just like So I jump to number 4 for a second. Look what Rashi says. A fascinating Rashi. Number 4 is Rashi. Hagun fitting Finavius. Rasa she saw Beruach HaKodesh. Yechevet saw with the word number 4. We just jump to number 4. Yechevet saw with the Holy Spirit. She'asid in the future, brackets, Liyos Hagun. In the future, he will be fitting L'Nevuah. That changes everything. That means he wasn't taka fitting for prophecy right now. Without Rashi, it's mamash. It's the biggest question against the story, because if he was currently fitting for prophecy, then he had to have been an anav. But Rashi says no. She saw with Ruach HaKodesh. She saw the future. One day he will be fitting. You know what that means? That means right now he wasn't. Say fakir. That means right now he wasn't. Why not? We could say he was a baby, but maybe he wasn't yet a chacham. Maybe he wasn't yet a gibber. Maybe he wasn't yet a usher. He didn't have any of those things. But maybe also he wasn't an anav. Back to the Gemara number 3. There's the Achedim that say, Noilad, he was born Kishuhu Mol without a foreskin. He was Moshol. Now that also, why was Moshe born already Brisk, already with the Brisk? Because he was perfect. Everyone is born with a foreskin in order that we can go through the action of perfecting ourselves. If Moshe was born without a foreskin, it means Moshe did not have to perfect himself. So in idea, that also goes against the story of Tiferes Yisroel. According to Tiferes Yisroel, Moshe not only had to perfect himself, Moshe had a huge task, because he had a whopping, awful nature, which he had to superhumanly transform. And the foreskin he didn't have, it's almost counterintuitive that the foreskin he didn't have, because he doesn't have to, there's nothing for him to rectify. And yet inside he has this yetzer that he has to rectify. So that's also, just doesn't seem to ring right. Chachamim Oimrim, B'shah shednoilad Moshe, when Moshe was born, Nismala habayis kulei ur. The house was full of light. That's what toiv means. All of these Tanoim are discussing what does toiv mean. Because Ksiv Hacha, that she saw him, he was good, and it says there Hashem saw the light was good. Now, again, if the house was full of light, almost anyone that discusses this subject quotes this Gemara. What does it mean he was toiv? The house was full of ur. What do you mean the house was full of light? If he has this awful nature inside of him, and he could have gone either way, he could have been Moshe, he could have been, the head mafia boss, right? And wasn't determined. He has free will, choose later in life. If he has this awful yetzer, so then why was the house taka nismala habayis kula full of light? Now we'll get back to that. Maybe we'll have an answer for that. But it seems like all of these opinions seem to fly in the face of the Tiferes Yisroel. In fact, look at number 5. It's the Gemara in Sait on the next page. It says, Vatiftach, Bisya opens up the basket, Vatireu, she sees him, Es Hayela, the child. What does it mean she sees him, the child? You should have just said she saw the child. Vateira, she saw me boile. Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chanina. Sherasa Shechina ima, she saw the Shechina with him. That means the Shechina was already with him. The Gemara in the Durham says, Eina Shechina Shaira, the Shechina doesn't rest on a person unless you have qualities. Amongst them is humility. Now it also says there, Gibber, Chacham, and Ashir. So how Moshe checked those boxes, I don't know. But as far as if you just focus on Anivus, here it says not only he was fitting, not only that one day he would be fitting for the Shechina was already there. The Shechina was already there. Imay. So, now what's this debate of Rab Meir, Rab Yehuda, Toiv or Tuvia? There's a sefer called Iyei Hayam on Gemara, written by Rab Yehuda Lev Edel, times of the Alter Rebbe. He says, you know what the debate of Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda is? He doesn't quote the story. He's before the Tiferes. He doesn't quote the story, but he says the debate is, was Moshe naturally good, or Moshe had to work on himself to become good? Rab Meir says it's toiv. Moshe was born perfect. Rabbi Yehuda says tuvya. He became good for the sake of God. Naturally, he could have been up to trouble, but he transformed himself in his avodas Hashem, tuvya, for the sake of Hashem. So he already says that the debate of Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is this very issue. He doesn't quote this whole story of the painter, fine. But the notion, he says, this is a very interesting possibility. Because otherwise, it's almost like, what's this debate to Rab Meir, like, Toiv, Tuvia, it's a very subtle, like, what exactly? No, because it says, no, Tuvia. According to the Hayam, it's a major. It's a whole different outlook on what Moshe's character was. Okay. So, Rab Rappaport, Rab Chaim Yitzchak Aaron Rappaport, who wrote this Klil Tiferes in the 1890s to uproot the entire story, cast it out. So he quotes, it's about, like I said, it's about a 20-page kuntras. He quotes all these Gemaras in number 3 and number 5. And he said, all these things indicate that Moshe was special. Moshe was already holy. And he quotes a few more. This is still, we're segueing in. Number 6 is the Klil Tiferes quoting from the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. And this statement is mamash, it's Amar Rab Nasanel. When Moshe was born, his parents saw him. Toyerei kamalach elikim, he looked like an angel. And they gave him a bris milah on the 8th day. According to the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, he was not born gemalat. He needed a bris. And they called him Yekusiel. According to the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, his name was Yekusiel. He's called Moshe because that's the name Bisya gave him. And like the Medrash says, you see, if you goimel chesed to somebody, look how, because Bisya granted chesed to Moshe, the Eibusha said, I'm going to call Moshe by the name that she gave him. In Divrei Hayomim, the name is Bisya. But the Medrash says that she was like the daughter of Hashem, so you could play it to Basya. But either way, Rab Nasanel says, hold on. When Moshe's parents looked at Moshe in the little, what did they see? He looked like an angel. According to the Tiferes Yisroel, what should they have seen? They should have looked at his face and seen this guy has every bad character trait. No, according to Tiferes Yisroel, what do you see on the face? The simonim of gaiva and selfishness, all these other horrible traits. What does it mean he looked like an angel? But on the contrary, when he was older and he'd already changed himself, his face there was still a remnant of his old nature. Kal v'chomer, when he's born and he has that nature, according to Tiferes Yisroel, it should be reflected on his face, and yet no, he looked like an angel. So maybe they didn't have that chokhmah, so they just saw something shining.
Or because he's their kid, so to them he's an angel.
Okay.
Later you become
You have teva, you have nature.
Right. It's a little counterintuitive that later in life, after he transformed himself, the mark still remained, but he didn't have it when he was born. You say it only came when he was a boy, once you start developing a baby's taka pure. Okay. That's an argument that can be made. Fine. Then he says, let me quote you a couple Zohars. 4 shtiklach Zohar, he says, take that to Tiferes Yisroel. What does it say? Look at number 7. Vayelech ish, there was a man that went, in this week's parasha, says the Zohar, the ish is Amram, and he married the daughter of Levi, that's Yocheved. A bas kol Nochsus descended, and it said, and told him, Lizdavgapa, a bas kol told him that, go remarry Yocheved, because Kodiv's man at the time has come, the proconities of the Jews to be redeemed. Through a son, Debra, through the son, the Zishalid Minah, will be born from them. So Amram was on a mission, and Kutshubricha was Messiah that she would conceive. Fine. Va'aldon on this, lo is ade shchinta mahu bra. The Shechina never left from that boy, Do'elidu, that they gave birth, L'kayama forever. The Shechina was with Moshe forever. Tochazi kamsi Amram, this Dabek baby who cleaved to God, Nafak min he had Moshe, that Hashem lo ya'adi minei la'am, and God never left him. Ushchinte stabke ba'adei tadi, the Shechina was always with Moshe. Sakal chulke, fortunate is his portion. It sounds like the Shechina was with Moshe from day 1 till the end. In order to be a keli for the Shechina, he has to be completely holy. He can't have all of this negativity inside of him. L'chayra. Continues, and he says, Beis, look at this Zohar. Tana, the Zohar says it was taught when Moshe was born. It says clearly he was born. Yichid HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shmai Olav, Hashem united his name on him. As it says, she saw that he was good, and the Zohar says Hashem is good. Ta'amuru'u, ki tov, Hashem is good. Tov Hashem lakol, God. So the Eibishter is meyachid his name. Next one. Vayinages hatzoin achar amidbar. Moshe was with the sheep. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Moshe Rabenu, from the day he was born, lo zaza mimenu ruach hakodesh. From the day he was born, ruach hakodesh didn't leave him. So he had to have been. He can't have been a Baal Gaiva. Like number 8 is another powerful. This is another shtickle Zohar. B'chulu, the Zohar says like this. You know, you have in Chumash Avram, you have Moshe, you have Yaakov, and you have Shmuel, Moshe. Says the Zohar, by all places, the Shema Itkar traces, but the name is twice. Psik taima begavayu. There is, when you sing it with the trop, there is a pause. There's a cantillation pause in between Avram, that's how you meant to sing it, and Yaakov, Shmuel. For example, Avram, Yaakov, Shmuel. Avram, this is quoting from the Zohar. Avram Moshe lo yifsik taima begavayu. When it says Moshe's name twice, you don't pause, and the Zohar explains why. Because Avram and Yaakov and Shmuel, they had different stages. He says you had Avram before the 10 tests, Avram after. You had Yaakov when Yosef was away, so he was stripped from his Ruach HaKodesh, and you had Yaakov later. Shmuel. Moshe never went through different stages. It says in the Zohar, from the day Miyoyim De'is Yalid, Shalom Havas, from the day he was born, he was complete. The Chasidim says, Vatera Oisa Kitovu. The Zohar says that because she saw he was good, it means he was complete from day one. He was complete, and he didn't go through stages. L'chaira, if he was born with a horrible inclination and he had to transform that, then he went through stages, even more than Avram, he just went through tests. Those tests were external. Here Moshe had to battle them himself. This Zohar is very powerful. Now, I will tell you, in Chassidus, we often quote this Zohar. In Chassidus, it's usually explained the difference between the neshama of these tzaddikim, the way it is down here, compared to the source of the neshama, the way it's above. That by all the other tzaddikim, there's a difference. Not by Moshe. The way his soul is above and the way his soul is down here is exactly the same. So then that's talking about Moshe's neshama. That's something else. But the simple reading of the Zohar is it's Moshe's life. The beginning of his life to the end of his life, there was no progress, there was no change, there was no development. It was always one and the same. So kind of disproves the Tiferes Yisroel. Yes?
So how do we account for the trouble that he had when he killed the Egyptian before he went to Midian?
The trouble, Pari wanted to kill him.
I mean, personally, murdered the man.
The person needed to die. He saved a Jew.
So
that's not called murder. That's called saving a life. If you kill a terrorist and save a victim, then that's not an act of murder. In fact, we had a shir about a kohen duchening, right? If a kohen kills a terrorist, is the kohen classified as a murderer and no longer can duchen, the birchas kohenim? And Rav J.B. Soloveitchik wanted to prohibit the kohen, and all the other rabbis, of Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Avadia Yosef, etc., said, no, this is not an act of murder, it's an act of saving a life. Like Pinchas, when Pinchas killed Zimri and Cosby, it was an act of stopping the plague. He saved, it was an act of the pikuach nefesh, not an act of murder. So Rabbi Rappaport is making his point quite clear, based on the Gemaras and the Zohars, that forget the story, the whole notion Moshe had Midas Roy seems to be false. Let's move to the next page. So, this Rabbi Rappaport, hold on a second. Okay, number 9. This Rabbi Rappaport reached out to some of the great minds of the generation. One of them was the Aderes, Rebbe Leo David Rabinowitz Tu'umim. The Aderes, the end of it, is in Eretz Yisroel, the father-in-law of Rav Kook, and the Aderes was a great scholar, and he was a very special person, and he wrote a letter to this Rabbi Rappaport. And he says in number 9, Samachti ma'oid, I'm so happy. He says to her, when I saw what you're working on, I was so happy. Matzad, I found a friend. You did libi mailas kveterasa shiche in bedover that me'oidi from way back when. From the first time I saw this in the Tiferes Yisroel, I was pained. And so many times I screamed when people would talk about it, I would yell at them. Says that there's anyone that would even, if there was a shir Thursday night, he would come in and disrupt the shir. Finish. And I told B'Kahal Am that with forgiveness from the great God, the Tiferes Yisroel, Lo Yafa Asa, he did not do right by quoting Divrei Asak, this negative report on Tzadik Shalom. And says that there's, where did it come from? It came from Am Loyes, from German, other languages, Oivdei Kechavim HaKadmonim. The Aderes says this story comes from early idol worshippers. Now, we'll talk about different sources of the story, but let's just read what he says. The Chazal say about them, PM Dibber Shav, you can't trust a word they say. Now, he's giving he's accusing the Tiferes Yisroel of quoting from some Goyishe Oivid Kechavim, a Kadmonim, early manuscript. Now, was the story there about Moshe, or was the story there about some fable about some other guy? Doesn't say. But either way, he says, PM Dibber Shav, you can't trust a word they say. Continues the Aderes in number 10. V'asher kosev yedidish yichya. You're right, he says, Rabbi Rappaport. Ki yitu, people think, they make a mistake. B'ameshe yidomu, people think, shebozeh nichbad, people think they're doing Moshe Rabbeinu a favor. Because what's greater, a Baal Tshuva or a Tzadik? A Baal Tshuva or a Tzadik? So Rabbi Yevo and Rabbi Yochanan debate. Rabbi Yevo says a Baal Tshuva is greater. Rabbi Yochanan says it's Tzadik. Now it happens to be that the great Rameh Mifano, right, can't go a shir without him, and the Shalom both say there's no debate. It depends. If the Baal Tshuva does Tshuva out of fear, the Tzadik who never sinned is greater. If the Baal Tshuva returns out of Ava, then he's greater. Okay, but the simple reading of the Gemara, there's a debate. And people think that since a Baal Tshuva Odif, a Baal Tshuva is greater than a Tzadik Gomer, the Rambam Paskins, the Baal Tshuva is greater than a Tzadik Gomer. So then, by saying Moshe had evil in him and he had to break it, he's doing him a favor. It's actually raising him on a higher pedestal. So, Be'emes, he says, no, halacha Rabbi Yochanan, the Tzadik Gomer Odif. So they say, no, the truth is, halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan. It's better to be a Tzadik Gomer. So you're just ruining Moshe's reputation by saying the story. Now, it's Mamash Apella why, and the Aderes agrees to this, that the halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan. The Rambam Paskins like Rabbi Yevo. The Rogatshov and the Rebbe discuss why Taka the Rambam does Paskin like Rabbi Yevo, but that's the psak of the Rambam. It's very strange that over here they say halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan with no mention of the. It's a Rambam in Hilchas Tshuva. I don't know. They must have been aware of it. Very strange. Very strange. But either way, since they believe that halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan, then you're better off saying Moshe was perfect from birth. You're not doing him a favor by saying he had to transform himself. In number 11, the Aderes says one more point. He says the truth is, no one's saying Moshe Rabbeinu sinned and did tshuva. We're saying something else. We're saying Moshe Rabbeinu had taivas and had to conquer them. This is a different issue. This is an issue the Rambam talks about. The Rambam wrote a commentary to Pirkei Avos, like he did to all of Mishnayos. His introduction to Pirkei Avos is called Shmona Prakim, the 8 chapters. In one of the chapters, the Rambam says like this. On the one hand, the Rashi in the end of Parshas Kedoshim quotes, from the Medrash, the Rambam quotes this as well, that when you walk past McDonald's, you shouldn't say that smells awful, even though it does. You should say, ooh, that smells delicious. But God said no. God said no. So that sounds like it's better to want something wrong and hold yourself back. But says the Rambam, the philosophers say that the greatest thing in life is to purify your heart, that you shouldn't want something negative in the first place. So the Rambam says it depends. When it comes to something taka bad like murder, what's better? To want to kill your friend and hold yourself back, or to remove any such feeling from your heart? It's obviously better not to want to kill your friend. The Rambam says anything which is understood to be negative, you're better off cleansing your heart not to desire it at all. But something which is not inherently bad like treif, why can't you eat treif? God said so. So then, instead of saying it's disgusting, say, no, it's good, but God said no. You should make it a Jewish thing. Really, I should want it, but God said no. That's what the Rambam says. So says the Aderes, wait a second. You're telling me Moshe Rabbeinu had all of these awful feelings, ben adam lachaveroi, jealousy, taivas, he wanted. You're not doing him a favor by saying that Moshe Rabbeinu had the possibility to be a horrible person, ben adam lachaveroi. For that, the Rambam clearly says you're better off having a clear heart. And he says, "B'Moshe Rabbeinu v'Shalom, lo yimotzinu bo shum ovel." No one says Moshe sinned. No one says Moshe ever sinned. So b'chlal eino shaykh l'sug hazeh. This has nothing to do with Baal Tshuva versus Tzadik. Lo yimer alav is a Baal Tshuva adif or Tzadik gomer adif. He says really, the debate of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Vo has nothing to do with Moshe. Rabbi Yochanan were talking about if somebody sinned or didn't sin. No one says Moshe sinned. This has to do with the Rambam in Ches Prokim. What's greater, Tiferes Yisroel or Chassid mitchilasei? The Rambam is the guy that has to break his heart, or the Chassid mitchilasei. She'ein loy mitivay shum cheshik laver, someone who doesn't desire. And look there in the Rambam's words, a beautiful word, where the Rambam differentiates between if it's something which is inherently bad, you're better off being a chassid, a complete pious person with no evil desire, versus something which is really parava, really, it's only because Hashem said, can't wear shatnez because God decided. So don't say, I hate woolen linen. Just say, the Italian suit's a beautiful suit. I'd love to wear that $5,000 suit, but God said it's a shatnez, I can't do it. So the Adera says that it's belittling Moshe's covet to say that he had awful midos, awful character. He would have harmed all the people around him, but he broke himself. So that was the letter the Aderes wrote. Okay, so the Aderes' opinion is pretty clear. The Aderes' son-in-law, Rav Kook also believes that you can't say Moshe was born with any negativity. They're not the only ones. In number 12, you have Torah Shleima from Rabbi Menachem Kasher. Rabbi Menachem Kasher and the Torah Shleima, he lived in Manhattan at the end of his life, an incredible encyclopedic mind, and he wrote an encyclopedic work on the Chumash. He writes in number 12, he says, in Sefer HaYosher Kan, this is in this week's parsha, he says there's a book called Sefer HaYosher, right? It's an old medrash. It says, Vateled ben, Moshe was born, Vayamala kol habayis or gadol. It wasn't stam a light. It was a huge light. Ka'er HaShemesh, like the sun and the moon when they're shining. Vatei Roisha, the woman saw the yellow kitovi was good, and so is found in Divrei Hayomim LaMoshe. Okay, that's another work. Says the Torah Shleima, look in the Sefer Kadham Kemach. That's from Rabenu B'chaya and Chanukah. The Kadach Kemach says, let me tell you a medrash. Or Zoru ala Tzadik. Light is planted for a Tzadik, that's Moshe. Because when he was born, the house was full of light. And Rabbeinu B'chaya says, Mitchilas Toldoisa, from the beginning of his existence, he was fitting to enlighten the whole world through Torah. That means he was prone to it from when he was born. According to Tiferes Yisroel, when he was born, he was likely to go to completely the other way. He had to completely transform himself. Rabbeinu B'chaya seems to say not like that. And then he quotes the picture that we saw, that Moshe's parents looked at him and he looked like an angel. Fine. And then he says, I want to tell you that all of these statements prove against the Tiferes Yisroel. In the end of Kiddushin, we're number 12, the fourth to last line. He says, the Tiferes Yisroel says, I found something beautiful. And he brings an Agoda Arucha about Moshe's cluster panav, that he looked like a person with horrible traits and everything, the Chol Chesroinus. And when they asked Moshe, he said, it's true, that was my original nature, but I broke it and I transformed myself. In the last line says Rabbi Menachem Kasher, Agad the Zois ein lo shum makar, there's no source. Rabbi Menachem Kasher, he was the expert in Medrashim of Torah Sheba'al Peh. He's the guy. He says there's no source. It's just a Moshol ba'alma. It's just a Moshol. Now, so he doesn't scream at the Tiferes Yisroel. He's just saying it's a Moshol. It's a Moshol. So in number 13, this is the Sefer Zecher Yehosef, one of the greatest Torah minds 150 years ago, was Rabbi Zechariah Yehosef Stern, a Rav in Lithuania. He's not very well known for some reason. He was mamish one of the greatest geniuses of his generation, and he wrote a lot. I've quoted him before. But in the back of one of his Sfarim, he has a whole piece on Agadata, Taluchas or Agadas, and over there he has a piece about this. And you know what he says? He says Rabbi Rappaport was making a big deal. Rabbi Rappaport wrote this whole kuntrus, destroying the story, bad-mouthing the Tiferes Yisroel, The Aderes as well. In fact, some rabbi said you should go to every Mishnayos and you should cut out or white out the story that Tiferes Yisroel wrote. It's that bad. And the Tiferes Yisroel was wrong. Anyone who quotes it has to be silenced. Says Rav Stern, relax. Look what he says in number 13. I love it. V'imeyos is true machshavtoi ritzuya. That Rabbi Rappaport had good intentions for the kavod of Moshe, the faithful shepherd. But Hoyeloi Moshe was extra laharish oilam. He got the whole world screaming on this. The lishbech kitten shel roshchen. He poured a thing of hot water on the Tiferes Yisroel. Relax. He says, Ein Suffolk. It's clear that this sipur Ein Yesoida Gam Bekronik V'Kadema. This doesn't come from a German chronic. It's not like anybody saw it in some German chronicle. That was just the accusation that Rabbi Rappaport and the Aderes directed at the Tiferes Yisroel. He says it can't be. Rachok mitzaratzmoi liyoisem mizman kodum kazer. I think that it doesn't make sense that the chronics would have a story all the way of Moshe Rabenu. Because it's from such an early, it's hard to know exactly what he means with that line. But Virak, he says like this, no one ever meant it to be a true story. The Tiferes Yisroel was quoting, it's an interesting Moshol. It's an interesting Moshol, how someone could transform themselves from the lowliest potential to become the greatest prophet. It's a great story. Koisev HaMaimer wrote it, B'derech Melitza, it's just a Moshol. To imagine, as if it happened, and to tell it over as a story, like all the Mosholim of Rabbi Meir about fox, and so many others. And just like no one ever thinks about a story of a lion and a bear that it actually happened, it's obviously just a Moshol. Now, the author here thought, now why did he stick Holy Moses? Just don't write Moshe's name. No, because it's Moiroi Lahafli B'Mad. He wanted to show, Moshe wasn't a freebie. Moshe wasn't a freebie. Moshe worked on this. So Loyai came at Tzaddik Tzirasa B'Tev. It wasn't created like this. Rather, because of his Gdusha, he vanquished his chumistic koiches to conquer them. And this is a great lesson that everyone has the power to reach the highest levels, even if you weren't born like that. And don't think that you're wired to be a Rosh. It's not true. And that's why tzaddikim are greater than malachim, because malachim are created that way. He says, and look on the left side, he finishes off, the ain which I don't want to come by Riches to say anymore. He says, fortunate is someone who has the sense to understand the Mesholim of Chazal. And then you realize there's no room to scream the Tiferes Yisroel. Come on, give him a break. Adrabah, his words were said by Haskel. It was done, calculated to be Magdal, the mile of Moshe Rabenu, and to excite the hearts of people, that no one should say, I'm doomed because of my negative nature. There's hope for everyone. So Rav Stern writes that this crusade and this jihad of Rav Rappaport was uncalled for and unnecessary. Yeah, very interesting. But where Taka did the story come from? The Tiferes Yisroel made it up then? He just made up the Moshol? If you look in number 14, this is from the commentary of Reb Sadia Gaon on Sefer Yetzirah. So on Sefer Yetzirah, there's a commentary of Reb Sadia Gaon, probably not from him, but either way, it says there was a story in Miyanse, Be'ish Echad, with a fellow, his name is Socrates. Now this is not the famous Socrates. By the Abar Benel, when he quotes Socrates, he says Socrates HaKodesh, the holy man, because he was killed al Kiddush Hashem, as was spoken about in the past. But this was Socrates HaGalili, from Galil, whatever, that he understood Sefer Yetzirah, and he was mavchin, he was able to discern a person's face and your actions. When he would see Dmus Tzurasa, he could tell you what you're up to. He could look at you and see what you're up to. There's one idea to look at a person and know what they've done. That's really kind of a Kabbalistic power. Yeah. Then there's just to know a person's nature. Then there's deeper to know a person's Gilgulim. Rabbi Yitzchak Saginor, Rabbi Yitzchak the blind, the son of the Ravid, never saw in his life, but he would walk into the room and he would know who's in the room and tell you exactly where your soul was in the past, if it's a new soul or not. He used to walk in the room and he would feel if anyone in the room was going to die. They said no one ever saw like he saw. It's not with his physical eyes, his spiritual eyes. Now, this Socrates said about a certain Tzadik, that this Tzadik is a thief, he's a murderer, and is an adulterer. Any more compliments? So they told this Tzadik, you know what Socrates said about you? So the Tzadik said, unbelievable. How could he know that that's what's going on in my mind? Vada is a Chacham Gadol, he knows my face. And this guy said, I have tremendous Torah to hold myself back from carrying out those, I want to kill, I want to steal. I'm battling myself constantly. Rebbe Akoyin of Izmir, the great rabbi of Izmir, the generation before the Baal Shem Tov, writes a similar story about Aristotle. And this is probably one of the first, maybe the first source, that Aristotle was an expert in palm reading. And he heard that who came to town? Someone who claims to be an expert reader of the palms. So Aristotle got some warm wax, put his hand in, and then he gave it to one of his students. He says, give it to this visiting Chacham, see what he says. So the Chacham looks at the Chacham, says, if I have to judge based, I don't know whose hand this is. I see that this person has tremendous taivas. Oh, he covets. Oh, it's full of it. But he's a big Chacham, great intellectual. And the student thought it was funny. He came back to Aristotle and said, you know what the visiting guy said? He doesn't know how to read palms from Adam. And Aristotle said, what did he say? She gave him the whole diagnosis. Aristotle said, unbelievable. That guy knows what he's talking about. Because I am full of those desires as he described. But with my discipline, I control myself. Now, there is the famous story of Aristotle, right? That he wanted to be with the wife of Alexander. As is told by Rabbi Yitzchak de Minako, the great Kabbalist in the times of the Rishonim, that he wanted to be with Alexander's wife, and he pestered her till she said, okay, they made up a time and a place. Unbeknownst to Aristotle, Alexander was hiding, in the next room. They had made up that one of them was going to be on the floor, the other one was going to be riding on top of them, like riding an animal. And as they were in this activity, all of a sudden, she makes a sign, and boom, Alexander the Great comes in. Rebbe, this is what you're up to! And he locked him up and he tortured him. But he wouldn't kill him. He said, A, there's still more I have to learn from Aristotle. B, when he advises me on war, I always win. Can't afford to kill him. And the Rebbe once mentioned this by a Fabrengen, that Aristotle was caught doing something inappropriate, and he said, now I'm Aristotle the mensch. I'm not Aristotle the teacher. Anyhow, but according to this story, and Aristotle admitted that he had all of these taivas inside of him, but usually his self-discipline, carried him through. So many contend, listen, there's a story here with some Socrates, Haglili, there's a story with Aristotle, there's all these stories, and somehow, it trickled in as a Moshol about Moshe, but it was never true, it was never meant to be true. Look at number 15. Hold on, we're still going to see the incredible stuff is yet to come, but we're going at a good pace. In number 15 is the Shittul Mekubetzes on Masechta Nedarim. And the end of the third parak. And he quotes, V'achachma toz la'adricham b'darchei yosher, Chachma gives you strength to set you on the right path. Ki ahu maishi, says a story. So this is the Shittul Mekubetzes, the Betzalel Ashkenazi, in the 1500s in Egypt, who's collecting from all manuscripts of Rishonim before him. Ki ahu ma'isa, story b'chacham echad, the wise man. He sent Demus Partzufa, he sent an image of himself to another Chacham. Chacham B was Makir b'Dmusa Partzufin. So Chacham A sends with a messenger a painting of him to Chacham B, who was an expert in evaluating the face. And Chacham B sees the painting, he hid behind the couch. Nitzman mipnei biususe, he partially hid himself from the painting, of that painting that he saw. So the messenger asked, Lama nitzman mimena, what are you hiding? And the guy said, that face, evil. I've never seen such an image, a chemda, he covets, a noyef, an adulterer, a thief. It's also to look at such a face. Anyhow, so the shliach went back to Chacham A. He didn't want to tell him what happened, right? Nisyari is afraid to go back to his master until the master called him and said, don't be afraid, tell me what happened. And the messenger said, this is what I heard from Chacham B, and therefore I was afraid to come to you. So Chacham A said, Bevadai ein Chacham k'mo Yosef Baal Partzav. That guy knows his stuff. From everything Amar Emes Amar, it's all true. Yitzri Magor, my Yetzer, it incites me and seduces me to do all of those evil. But the Chachma that I possess holds me back. That's the story. Right, this is the Beinani, the guy that fights. So we have another source, anonymous, Chacham Echad. So you have Rabbi the Aderes and Rav Rappaport, who are on a crusade to say, you see, the story is not about Moshe, it's about a Chacham, it's about Aristotle. Of course, you can have people, great people, that had negative nature and change themselves, and it's a wonderful thing. But it's not true about Moshe, and it also belittles Moshe. Based on the Rambam and the Shemona Prakim, we saw that you're better off having a pure heart concerning many of these things. Then we have Rabbi Stern who says, come on, the Tiferes Yisroel never meant it was about Moshe, it was just a Moshol. It's a beautiful Moshol. Why was Moshe put in? Because it's more inspiring. Because then it means, look, you too could become like holy Moses. It wasn't put there to degrade Moshe. It was put there to be an even bigger inspiration. Sorry, what's your question?
These ones are more like the Beinani, where they didn't actually change themselves. They're still fighting. The first Moshol about Moshe was
right. More than just the Beinani. Exactly, more than the Beinani. He transformed himself. There is a letter of the Rebbe that a Beinani, over time, when he's able to chip away at the Nefesh Bahamas. We'll get to that soon. So here's the thing. The Tiferes Yisroel is not the only person to quote this. Okay? There is a sefer, join me on the next page, number 10, okay, number 10. This is a sefer called, this is a Rashi in Sanhedrin, okay, very important, okay, we're on number 16, sorry. It's the last page. It looks like a 10, it's really a 16. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, it's a Rashi, okay, and this is fascinating. The rabbis sent a letter to Mar Ukva, who lived in Bavel. And the heading of the letter was, L'dezivle, the person who shines, Kabar Basya, like the son of Basya. What does that mean? Says Rashi, Moshe. Moshe is the son of Basya, because he was raised by her. And Moshe shined. It says in Parshas Kisisa, Moshe's face shone. And they were saying, Mar Ukva, your face shines like Moshe. Lemisha Makrin, they were saying, your Makrin opened, your face is radiating, like Moshe Rabenu, who Bisya raised him, Bas Pareh. That's one pshat. Lashon Acher, another pshat, is you have Kavar Beisei. They said, Mar Ukva, your face shines like the man of God's house, which also refers to Moshe, like Moshe was a ben Bais, like it says in Ba'aloischa B'chol Beisi Nemanu. Fine. Now, what does it mean, Mar Ukva's face? We know Moshe shone. It says in Parshas Kisisa. What do you mean, Mar Ukva? L'dezivle, what does it mean that his face shone? Because he was a Chacham. And it says, Chachmas Adam Torah Panav, the wisdom shines. Says Rashi, I found in a Sefer Haggadah, you have to know the story, Mar Ukva was a Baal Tshuva. What do I mean? Nosen Einov Be'isha Achas. This is Sanhedrin Daf Lamed Aleph. Says Rashi, Mar Ukva, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, of the Bezdin where he was, there was a certain woman that he desired. He was so lovesick after her. The nafal b'chayil is pashut ill. She was a married woman. Okay, this is the head of the bezdin. So l'yomim, now days passed. Nitzrucha, she needs money. He was also a wealthy man. Umitoich duchka, because she needed the money. Nisratzisla, she said, I'll go ahead with your desires. So that's it. That was his lucky day. But in the heat of the moment, Kovash Yitzra, he conquered him, vanquished his desire. He gave her the money, or Patra l'shalom. V'nisrap, at that moment he was healed. At that moment he was healed. She walked out the front door, Pasha was healed. And when he used to walk into the market, there was a candle burning around his head from heaven. And that's why he was called Rab Nosen Tzutzisa b'Masechta Shabbos. We'll see that in a minute. He had a nickname, Nosen Tzutzisa. So too over here, a Hachanami, so that's why that's why they said to Mar Ukva, you shine like Bar Basya, because of the light that would shine on him. Now, what's this Nasan Tzutzisa? Look in number 17. It's a Gemara in Shabbos. Daf Nun Vav. Umenu, who, there's a big Baal Tshuva, his name was Mar Ukva, the son of Nehemiah. He was the head of the exile ark, Reish Galus and Bavel. He is Nasan de Tzutzisa. He is Nasan de Tzutzisa, he was called. We'll see why. Says Rav Yosef, I was once sitting at a shir and I fell asleep. Right, don't let the Bacham hear about this. I was sitting at the shir and I fell asleep, and I saw in my dream the kaposhit yodei v'kabla. I saw in my dream an angel came and received Nasan de Tzutzisa, received Mar Ukva. Says Rashi number 18, what's Nasan de Tzutzisa? Mar Ukva's nickname, Al Shem Nitzutzim, because of the sparks of light. When the Malach stuck out his hand to receive the repentance of Mar Ukva, there were sparks. So that's why he was nicknamed Nasan de Tzutzisa. Tzutzisa is sparks. Lishnar, another pshat, that the Malach held on to Mar Ukva b'tzitzis roishai, by his payas, or by his hair. He held on to him by his hair. So these are two reasons why he was called Nasan de Tzutzisa. But in number 16, Rashi and Hashem gives a different reason. He was called Nasan de Tzutzisa because there was a halo of light around his head. So it's a third reason. Now, hold on a second. Mar Ukva had light surrounding him because he was a Baal Tshuva, because he broke his temptations. And we're comparing him to Moshe Rabenu. His face shone like Moshe. So you could say, yeah, Moshe's face shone because Moshe shone, and Pashas Kisisi shone because of our Sinai, the second Lukas. Mar Ukva's face shone because he was a Baal Tshuva. That's what you would assume. Until you look in a sefer called Ein Eliyahu, from Rebbe Eliyahu Shik. He wrote a sefer on the stories of Gemara on Ein Yankov, and it's printed. And he says, no. He says, this isn't Stam. He said, it's the same light. You know why Moshe's face shined? Because he destroyed his temptations, he conquered himself. The same reason that Mar Ukva's face shone is the same reason why Moshe's face shone. And he quotes, he says, don't you know the story of the Tiferes Yisroel, that Moshe had to break himself? He quotes the story. If you look in number 19, this is again, Rabbi Rappaport says, Be'emes, the Sefer Ein Eliyahu gave a michshel gadol, gave a big stumbling block in his language, more than Tiferes Yisroel. You know why? The Tiferes Yisroel said in number 1, I found written. When the Ein Eliyahu, Rebbe Eliyahu Shik, you know what he says? He says, I don't have it on the page, but he says, the Tiferes Yisroel says that Moshe was born with horrible character. He says that's a wrong presentation. He says, he quotes that the Tiferes Yisroel brings that Moshe's nature was awful. It's mashma mizeh that the Tiferes Yisroel is saying as a fact that this is true. He said that's not true. The Tiferes Yisroel says, I found written ABC. But when the Ein Eliyahu quotes it, he says that the Tiferes Yisroel brings that Moshe was an awful character. So says Rabbi Reb Chaim Yitzchak Aaron Rappaport in the Klul Tiferes, he said that the Ein Eliyahu went already to a next stage, establishing as if this is fact. He says, Be'emes, the Tiferes Yisroel says, I saw in a letter, and I don't know who wrote it. But the Ein Eliyahu quotes it as fact. There were some others that quote the story. Two Chassidish Sfarim that quote the story, and a number that quote the notion that Moshe was born with bad midas. Very important. There's a sefer called Pnei Moshe, Rab Moshe Pshevarsker. Rab Moshe Pshevarsker, he was a student of the Maggid of Mizrich, early days. He was about 25 years older than the Alter Rebbe. Okay, so his early days. And he was a student of the Maggid. He says in his sefer, Pnei Moshe, on Chumash, in Parshas Chukas, he said it's brought in Sfarim. It's brought in Sfarim, and he quotes the story. So he's before the Tiferes, 100 years before the Tiferes Yisroel. So he's not quoting it. No. He's not quoting it. He just says it's brought in Samach dash Shreich, which means Sfarim. It's brought in Sfarim, and he quotes the story. So, wait a second, you ask, Rabbi Rappaport in the Adera said that Tiferes was living in Germany. He found it in some German chronicles. 100 years before him, there's a rebbe in Ukraine, Reb Shavarsk, who says, I found in Sfarim. Well, he wasn't in Germany. Where did he get it from? There's another sefer much later called Ach Pri Tvua. So he's in the 1800s. He's a student of the Yismach Moshe, fine, a Chassidish rebbe. And he writes, he quotes the story very short, Medrash. Medrash. So he's already after the Tiferes Yisroel, but he doesn't quote from the Tiferes Yisroel. He says Medrash. Shamati. I think he says Shamati. I heard there's a Medrash. I heard there's a Medrash. He's not saying he saw it. I heard there's a Medrash.
Game of telephone. First Yisrael starts off like.
But the Erpnei Moshe is 100 years before. He found it in Sfarim.
Also found in Sfarim, but no.
He doesn't say where.
No
Yeah, you're right. The Ach Pri Tvu is saying, and now the Ach Pri Tvu brings it in Parshas Tetzaveh about the Yikchu Eilecha bringing the olive to Moshe. He says Moshe is like an olive. You have to crush the olive to bring out the oil. Moshe broke himself to bring out his true virtues. That's how he describes the whole passage. It's a beautiful idea. It's a beautiful idea that he says. But he says Shamati Medrash. So you have a number of people quoting the story.
Source is the Erpnei Moshe.
Yes, some people want to say Tiferes Yisroel saw in the Erpnei Moshe, which is possible.
People traveled.
Yes, it's possible.
They saw the places, and then they talked.
So, and he didn't want to say, I saw in a Chassidish Sefer. He said, I saw written. Now, hold on. There are a number of great sources, though, that don't bring the story, but bring the idea that Moshe was born with such a nature. Sources you won't believe. In number 20, the Sefer Pri Haaretz, Reb Mendel Horodok, the Alter Rebbe's Rebbe. After the Maggid of Mezritch passed away, the Alter Rebbe wanted that the Maggid's son, Reb Avram the Malach, should become a Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe wrote a Ksav Hiskashros, a letter that I'm dedicating myself to you, together with Reb Zushav Anapol, the Reb Yehuda Leib HaKoyen. Avram the Malach passed away 2 years later, and the Alter Rebbe went to Reb Mendel Horodok for a bit, until he went to Eretz Yisrael. Reb Mendel of Horodok wrote the Pri Haaretz. In number 20, it's in Parshas Balak. He has a whole mimer about what Dira B'Tachtonim is. You know what it means to make a dwelling place for God? It means to completely transform your nature from negative to positive. And he says in number 20, all of these good midas were in Moshe. Kiyadua mipi Sfarim, it's known from Sfarim that Moshe Rabenu Avshalom was mutbeh, he was natured, betachlis hamidas rois. Not some a few bad midas, tachlis, the extreme. And he broke his midas l'tachlis to the ultimate good. Moshe did the ultimate 180. And he reached the greatest height possible for a person. He became humble. And the Shechina rested on him. That's Dira B'Tachtonim. Moshe was a Tachton. He was lowly in his potential, in his nature. And he became the ultimate height. Reb Mendel Horodok. Look at number 22. The Barditchever in Kedushas Levi. He's discussing the debate why Moshe wanted first to build the Kalim and then build the Mishkan, and Betzalel flipped it. First the Mishkan, then the Kalim. And he connects it to, in number 22, that the Yidden learned a lot from Moshe's fear and love of Hashem, because he was born b'midas rois k'muzkar b'sfarim. He was born with bad midas. Betzalel was born with good midas, and then he wants to connect that to their debate of do you do first the Kalim, the Mishkan, or the other way. Look in number 21. The Degel Machne Ephraim. The Degel Machne Ephraim, Reb Moshe Chaim Ephraim of Sadulkov, actually a Zayd of mine, he was a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. His mother was Adel, Baal Shem Tov's daughter. And he writes in number 21, I heard from my Zayd the Baal Shem Tov. You ready for this? Al derech sheshamati from my Zayd. It says in Bechoros that a certain Apikoros asked, Moshe, your teacher, was Kubustus, which either means he was a gambler or he was a kidnapper, because the accusation was that in the donations to the Mishkan, the money Moshe received doesn't add up to the tally that he had at the end, which means this guy was accusing Moshe of hoarding some of the donation money. So maybe Moshe was a gambler, he owed gambling debts, or goynev nefashos, or he was a kidnapper. So the Baal Shem Tov said, why would the Gemara even quote such an accusation against Holy Moshe? To understand that, also to understand, v'hibitu achrei Moshe, it says in Kisisa, the Jews gazed after Moshe in a negative fashion. How could it be a generation of knowledge like Moshe's Dur would gaze after Moshe? You know what it says in Masechta Sanhedrin? They suspected Moshe of Eishes Ish, of adultery with married women. It says, Vayikanu Moshe b'machna, by Korach and his gang, they were mekana, they were jealous of Moshe, but the word mekana is said in Parshas Nosai about someone who warned his wife not to seclude with a suspected individual, a promiscuous individual, and the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, you know what that means? People went around saying, don't let your wife hang out with Moshe. He's unscrupulous. How could that be? How could these rumors even go around? My Zayda said Moshe Rabenu was born in the Bechina to be a Rosh Gomer. And he had all the horrible midas, but he transformed himself, he broke the midas rois, and he was machnas in himself only midas tovas. So you have all these, the Baal Shem Tov, the Degel Machna Ephraim says, I heard from my Zayda. And by the Rebbe often quotes from the Sefer Degel Machna Ephraim. He was a big Rebbe. He was a Baal Meifus. If he says he heard from his Zayda, he heard from his Zayda. Reb Mendel Haradoker, the Barditchever, the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov. He said he heard it from my Zayda. He heard it from his Zayda. When he quoted this was from his Zayda. The Baal Shem Tov said the reason why the Gemara quotes the accusations against Moshe is because Moshe in his nature was shaykh to these things. Moshe could have been a kidnapper, God forbid. But he vanquished that part of him. So wait a second. In the Litvische world, the Aderes, we said Rav Kook, Rabbi Rappaport, and many others, we saw Rabbi Kasham, Rav Kook also, he says it's impossible. Moshe was good from birth, can't be. But you have these Chassidish Rebbes. You have a few quoting the story, the Erpnei Moshe and the Achpri Tvua, and you have the Baal Shem Tov, the Degel, the Barditchever, Mendel Haradoker quoting not the story, but the notion. What? Hold on. We're going to explain. Hold on.
Still all the questions.
Yeah, hold on. Hold on. I'm not going to leave you hanging. Hold on. We're getting to the climax of this. One of the great Rabbanim that got involved in this, his name was Rabbi Yeshua Yehuda Leib Diskin, the Maharil Diskin. He was known as the Brisk Rav, the Rav of Brisk. He had the Rogatchover learned by him. And then the Maharil Diskin moved to Eretz Yisrael, and he wrote incredible stuff. He was an incredible Torah scholar. And he wrote a letter to Rabbi Rappaport to stick into the Klil Tiferes. It's there. A page and a half of the 20 pages is this letter from Maharil Diskin. And the Maharil Diskin says, listen, the story couldn't have happened. And he has a number of issues with the story. Not so much the notion of Moshe Midas, but the story. And he says like this. First of all, Moshe Rabenu, after he came down with the second luchas, his face was shining. He always wore a mask. Unless he was giving a shir or speaking to the Eibishter, he always wore a mask. How did this painter come in and just paint? So some say exactly he painted the mask. That's why it was just the mask. No, there was no time. And for the guy to come and go back, and then the Arabic king to come and speak to Moshe and see Moshe's real face, unless he saw Moshe's real face during the shir. The painter, when they walk in during the shir, they're busy, they're busy painting. I have bachim all the time during shir, they're busy. I come, let me see your notes, and I see all of these beautiful pictures. Beautiful pictures. That's it. Mustam was one of the... So he says more than that. The clouds of glory surrounded the Jews. Even when Yisroel came in Parshas Yisroel, Moshe had to come, he couldn't go in. How did this painter just walk in? How did this king just walk in? It doesn't make sense. But his big kasha is like this. This is the real kasha.
That's his kasha? How can he get by the Hanani?
It's one of his.
Doesn't make sense. When Yisroel, the Baal HaTurim says, Yisroel said he had to shoot an arrow. And the arrow didn't, the clouds only allowed the arrow in because it was for Moshe's sake. How did this painter walk in? Come on. Listen, this is, but his main question is like this. That, let's say that if someone has a negative nature, it could be picked up, right? To these days, physiognomy is a pseudoscience, right? The scientists don't have any evidence, but who cares? There's lots of things that could exist that they don't have evidence for. But let's assume it's true, right? The Zohar says it's true. There is a chachma to be able to look at a person's features and to know their nature. When you change your nature, do those features change?
Yes.
Or once they set into is that the way they are? So says the Maril Diskin, there's a Zohar. The Zohar says, when Yisroel told Moshe, you can't judge the Jews alone, you need help. So Moshe said, so Yisroel gave him advice. You need people that hate money, people that are true people. Says the Zohar, how's Moshe supposed to know if someone possesses all of these beautiful character traits? So the Zohar says Moshe would look at the face, and based on that, he would know what's going on inside. So the Maril Diskin says, hold on a second. If your face features set in from the way you're born, then when Moshe is looking at the judges, he could see someone who has a horrible face, but in truth they've changed themselves. So to Fakert, they could have been great babies, but they've corrupted themselves over time, but it won't show. The only way the Zohar makes sense is if the features and these nuances change with your nature over time. So when Moshe observes someone, he can currently attest to what's going on the inside. So then when the painter paints Moshe, at this point Moshe changed himself. How is it that these negative things are showing up? That's his big kasha on the story. If you look in number 21, look what the Degel Machan Ephraim says in number 21, the second half. He says, let me tell you what it means, Koran. Why was Moshe's face shining in Kisisa? You know what it means Moshe's face shone when he got the second tablets? It means the lines and creases on his face changed. That's what it means, his face started to shine. Unbelievable. It's Yodua what it's mentioned in Tikkunim, in Zohar, that a person's muhus and your actions, good or bad, are recognizable on the creases on your face and your hands. When Moshe was born, now he says, my Zayda told me Moshe had a negative nature. Bevadai, when Moshe was a kid, it was a bad story. The Sirtutin Shaloi Meramzin on Bechinas Hara, on the negativity. But now, after he transformed himself, his creases, his face changed. Because the creases keep up to date with your current nature. That's what it means Moshe's face began to shine. That's what it means Koran, the skin started to shine. It means the Sirtutin Shaloi. The creases changed from bad to good, and now he looked good. So according to this, the story definitely couldn't have happened.
Rachel and Leah.
Meaning?
Exactly twins, right? One is...
If they were twins, right?
If they were twins.
Yaakov and
Yeah.
Yitzchak,
And one was in a horrible place, and one wasn't. And they feel it this Tanya. What is Tanya?
Saying
How
their
you feel
face,
now,
right.
and how you are, and
Saying
how
Leah's eyes gave it what's going on the inside, right. So according to this, the story couldn't have happened. The painter and the king, they would have seen Moshe's new face. However, fine. So the story might be out, fine. Like Rav Stern said, the story was never meant to be a true story. Rav Stern says Moshe's name was thrown in. Why? To make the story more inspiring. Of you could reach the heights of Moshe. But according to all these Chassidish sources, no. Moshe, really, this was his life. Moshe was born that way. So here's the interesting thing. The Litvishes, on the whole, the Litvaks, completely discredit both the story and the notion that Moshe had these negative midas. The Chassidish Sfarim, a few of them quote the story, others don't quote the story, but they're all quoting the notion. The Mendel Haradoker, the Barditcheva, the Degel, the Baal Shem Tov, it's also in Toldos Yaakov Yosef, etc., etc. It's everywhere. Why is it? The Litvishes can't, to them it's belittling Moshe's honor, and the Chassidim say, no, this is what happened. What's even more interesting is that, what's the Rebbe's opinion? Rab Mordechai Eliyahu came to visit the Rebbe in 1984, And he brought this up, and he was pushing that Moshe had to work on himself, transform himself. And the Rebbe said, no, the Rebbe said, yeah, there's a debate, but it says when he was born, Vatera Isa Ki Toivu, he was good. So the Rebbe didn't want to accept this. So why is it the Litvaks are on one side, all the Chassidish Rebbes are on another side, and then you have the Rebbe going with the Litvaks? So how do we explain? So I'm going to tell you what I think. The Alter Rebbe in Perek Chof Ches Tanya discusses somebody davens, they're trying to concentrate, and while they're trying to daven, boom, negative thoughts are plaguing their mind. So you could be downcast and think, you see, my davening wasn't real. So Alter Rebbe said, that's only true if you're one-dimensional, you have one soul. Says Alter Rebbe, you have two souls. There is a natural soul that can think, that can feel. Your nefesh hativis, the natural soul, also known as nefesh hachayunis, also known as the nefesh habahamis, the human with the basic instincts. But you also have a nefesh hashir, the second soul, the neshama. Jew has a neshama. So Alter Rebbe says the neshama also has the power to think, the power to feel. When you daven, you're using the power of your neshama to daven. It's your nefesh habahamis starts sending you all of these distractions. So just because you have negative thoughts in davening doesn't mean your davening wasn't real. You're two-dimensional, not one-dimensional. If you look at Moshe Rabenu or a person as one-dimensional, then by saying he was born with bad character, you've thrown him under the rug. You've destroyed his reputation. But when you understand that a Yid is two-dimensional, Moshe's neshama comes from the highest realms of Atzilus. But he also is born with a natural nefesh habahamis. Now, the Alter Rebbe explains a true tzaddik transforms that nefesh habahamis to become purely holy. But he has to transform that. At birth, Reb Chaim Vital says everyone's born with one neshama and a nefesh from a power of a nefesh from klipas noiga, a nefesh, the natural nefesh habahamis. Everyone's born with that. Every tzaddik has to transform. When we say Moshe Rabbeinu had negative character, that's his nefesh habahamis. His neshama atzilus. So therefore, all the Chassidish Rebbes would say, when Moshe was born, the house was full of light. The house was full of light. His neshama, the greatest soul that ever came down. It's Chochmah of Atzilus. The house was full of light. He was Moshol, representing the fact. Okay. Now, Mohol's a hard one. But his neshama was so bright and so special that, like Rashi says, his mother saw right away, this guy's going to be a prophet. But then Moshe had to break his nefesh habahamis, and he did. But who's Moshe? Moshe's his neshama. God gave him a peckle. God gave him a mess that he had to work with, to clean up, and he did with flying colors. But that in no way is tarnishing Moshe's reputation. That was his nefesh habahamis. That's not who he truly is. He's truly his neshama. More than that, there's a Gemara in Sukkah that says Abaya once saw a man and a woman going through the forest. Jewish man, and Abaya followed them. He wanted to make sure they didn't know that he was behind them. But in case they would get up to trouble. And they went together until they reached a fork in the road, and she went right, he went left. Abaya said, if I was that man, I would have done an Aveira with her. And he was down spirits. Until Abaya was told, no. Whoever has a greater Yetzer Tov has a greater Yetzer Hara. If you're greater than your friend, you have a greater neshama, you have a greater Yetzer Hara. Kol agodom mechaver, you're greater than your friend, your Yetzer Hara is greater than him as well. So fakert, according to that, the Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Nun Beis, according to that, Dafka, because Moshe had the greatest neshama, he was given the greatest Yetzer Hara. I mean, it's really a clear Gemara. What the Baal Shem Tov said, the Barditcher and Reb Mendel, so the Barditcher says he was born with Midas Reis. The Mendel Haradak said, Tachlis Midas Reis. The Baal Shem Tov said as well, Rosh Gomur, because of his tremendous neshama. In fact, in number 23, hold on, there's an interesting debate. The Gemara in Kedushin has a number of stories of a guy, Rabbi Amram, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Meir, who were all tested with Zoinus, and they were all, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva were about to succumb until the Zayna, which was really just a manifestation of the Satan, all of a sudden stopped the charade. Before Rab Meir and Rabbi Akiva, Rab Meir saw the Zayn on the other side of the water. He took a rope and started going across the water. Before he reached her, the Satan stopped the charade and said, "In heaven I heard, beware of Rab Meir and his Torah." So therefore I didn't let you... And Rabbi Akiva had a similar story as well. The story of Rabbi Amram was he had some girls that he had redeemed from captives, and they were staying in his house upstairs. And there was a ladder from downstairs to upstairs. He said, "We got to get rid of the ladder so no one can go up and down in the middle of the night." Middle of the night, he's taking a walk and he sees one of the girls. This ladder, there's the Gemara, you needed 10 people to pick up the ladder. Pick up the ladder. And he started climbing the ladder. And then he started screaming, "There's a fire, there's a fire!" The whole house cried, "Oh, the fire thing came." They said, "Rabbi Amram, you're making a fool of everybody." Rabbi Amram says, "Better I cause this embarrassment now than if I would have gone upstairs and had an embarrassment in the future." So about these stories, Rabbi Yosef Engel says, look in the letters of Mahari Mintz. The Mahari Mintz was the end of the Rishonim. He says that v'chein ikal meimer, Mahai time, you should know, whoever's greater than his friend has a greater Yetzer Hara. And that's the story of Rabbi Amram and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva in Masechta Kiddushin. The Mahari Mintz says all of the stories we just said, Rabbi Amram, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva, how could it be that they had such a craving? Dafka because they're the greatest. That's how it works. Now, Rabbi Yosef Engel says, wait a second. By Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva, it's actually mashma here. The reason they were put into the test was because they scoffed at the Satan. They used to laugh and say, "Oh, why does anyone do an Aveira?" As if the Satan could entice you. So the Satan says, "Yeah, let me show you just how powerful I can be." So Rabbi Yosef Engel has an issue with Mahari Mintz's interpretation by Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva, but by Rabbi Amram, it's very true that it's because the greater someone is, the greater the Yetzer Hara. So therefore, if you understand that, you're not tarnishing Moshe's legacy by saying he was born with a negative Yetzer Hara. Everyone's born with a natural soul. Now you would think, though, that a great Tzadik has a very delicate Nefesh Bahamas. No, the Gemara says in Sukkah, whoever's great is a big Yetzer Hara. Moshe's his neshama from Atzilus. So that's why I think through the lens of Chassidus is B'chlal no problem in Fakert. It only adds to Moshe by saying that Moshe had to work on himself and break himself. So why did the Rebbe not want to accept it? So what I can think of is like this. In Samach Vav, the Rebbe Rashab has a mimer, where the Rebbe Rashab says, why is it that you have Eliyahu Hanavi, you have Moshe Rabenu? Eliyahu Hanavi refined his body to the point he could take it with him upstairs to Gan Eden. Moshe Rabenu died, he had to be buried. His soul left his body was buried, no one knows where it is, but Moshe, why couldn't Moshe take his soul, take his body upstairs? It was like the Baal Shem Tov said, I could have gone up to Gan Eden like Eliyahu, but I want to fulfill what Hashem told Adam, that you are dust and will return to dust. So I wanted to fulfill that decree. Afarata v'lafar tashuv. So the Rebbe Rashab says like this, there's a big difference between the soul of Moshe and the soul of Eliyahu. The soul of Eliyahu wasn't as powerful, and therefore his body kind of concealed over his soul. So Eliyahu had to battle with his body. But because he had to battle, he did. And when he battled, he succeeded. And he refined his body to the point it became soul-like. He could take it to heaven. Moshe Rabbeinu, says the Rebbe Rashab, his soul was so bright and so radiant, his body, B'chal, didn't get in the way. So therefore, Moshe never had to battle with his body. And therefore, he never did. So he never really refined his body, so the body couldn't go to Gan Eden. Yeah. He never had to refine it because it didn't stand in the way. The Rebbe Rashab, Moshe Rabbeinu's soul was so powerful, it didn't have to combat against anything in its vicinity. So according to that, that flies in the face of this whole tradition that Moshe had a real Yetzer Hara that he had to combat with. According to the Rebbe Rashab, his soul was so powerful, it didn't have to battle with the things around him. So what would that mean? He was born with the Yetzer Hara for a second and then it was transformed, or that would be purposeless. The whole vort is that Moshe had to work and had to battle. But according to the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer, Moshe's soul was such that it just overwhelmed in an instant. Everything is physical. Just like he didn't have to work with his body, you would say he didn't have to work with his nefesh bahamas. It must have been his natural nefesh bahamas must have been so delicate and so pure that it was a very, very quick turnover for it to join. So to join the Tzad HaKedusha. So that explains why the Litvishes, they look at someone one-dimensional, you're poshut corrupting Moshe's legacy. If you say two-dimensional, then you understand why the Chassidim accepted. And here you also understand, though, why the Rebbe wouldn't accept it, because it just doesn't go with the way of Chassidus Chabad of Moshe Rabenu. Although the Rebbe did say, listen, the reason the Rebbe didn't want to accept it is because she saw that he was good, which the Zohar said, that was the Zohar quoted that pasuk for some of the ideas, the fact that Moshe never changed throughout his life. So it could be the Rebbe wasn't referring to what I'm saying with this Maimer, the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe is just saying, if Moshe was good, it meant he was good through and through. The Zohar understands that, right? The sources of the Zohar we saw in the beginning were quite convincing in favor of Rabbi Rappaport, against this whole notion. But listen, then you have the Baal Shem Tov. You had huge Chassidish Rebbes. So somehow you have to find a way to weave through the Zohars that the Ruach HaKodesh, because his neshama was so powerful, he had some level of Ruach HaKodesh. Hashem said his name. The Eibush was always with him. The issue just is the psik. The psik is really a problem. Because if Avraham Avinu has a psik because he went through the 10 tests, according to the Baal Shem Tov, Moshe did progress. He evolved. His neshama didn't, but he, as the whole package, did. It's very hard to say. Very hard.
Where do you get any indication other than what the Rebbe talks about, that she said he's good, and from the first shine?
It's not a sikha. It's something the Rebbe said to Rav Mordechai Eliyahu.
Okay.
The Rebbe
it does mesh with what the Rebbe
concedes that
says.
there's a debate. Very much in Mazda Rashab. Right.
So you have to have something to indicate that this, but we don't. We have from the first moment, like the Rebbe said, the shining and said good. That's
the neshama shined. The house was full of light because his soul was a neshama of Atzilus, but he has a nefesh bahamas, and it could. Anyhow, this isn't all. This is just some of the Rosh Prakim.
Scratching the surface.
Zil Gemur. You can go and find out more things written about this.
Moshe